Okay, so welcome everyone. My name is Craig Strong, and today I'll be talking about leveraging the four disciplines of execution and enterprise Kanban to improve government services. All right, so I'll start out by briefly introducing myself and framing the problem to be solved. And first, I'll discuss 4DX, the four disciplines of execution, and then Kanban flight levels. Finally, I'll put it all together and we'll finish with some key takeaways. And I hope to leave about 15 minutes at the end for questions. All right, a little bit about me. I've been in IT for a long time after studying computer science at MIT. I'm a co-founder of Aerial Partners. It's a digital services company in Times Square. And we do business with federal and New York City government as well as commercial organizations. Now, the interesting thing about government contracting is we get to tackle some really big problems. So, for example, we're helping the Social Security Administration pay out benefits to people who become disabled and can't work anymore. We're helping the FBI catch bad guys. And we're currently bidding on some work to help the Department of Homeland Security protect sort of critical infrastructure against cyber attacks. Been hearing about those in the news. So in addition to IT consulting, my company offers coaching and training like this. So I can see a lot of different courses here. Aside from our certification courses and Atlassian training, we do have some pretty unique courses like Agile for Leaders and Executives, and Achieving Business Agility with Kanban Flight Levels, which is what I will introduce in this talk. All right, so getting started. Why is it so difficult to actually execute on our strategy? Well, let me illustrate via a story. Imagine you are a senior executive. You're sitting here in this room, and the CEO has just finished presenting a plan for turning around the company. He said that despite having first communicated this plan many months ago, things were happening too slowly. He concludes with the line, "The time for debate is over. It's time for action." So the CEO then asks for questions. After a few minutes, one of your colleagues, Susan, raises her hand. Now, Susan says, "I understand the strategy. I agree with it. I think it's a good one. I've communicated with my teams. There are lots of initiatives going on, but what do you want me to do?" So I would like you now to speculate. Why do you think Susan said that? Please think about this and type your answers in the chat. We'll spend just a minute on this and hopefully can read out those some of those answers to me. Why do you think Susan asked what she should be doing after this big presentation? Any thoughts?
She wasn't given any direction.
She wasn't given direction. Yep. Juice.
Unclear expectations.
She's unclear on her expectations. Yep.
They were in the planning phase too long.
Yeah, planning phase too long. Yeah. Yep. That sounds familiar, doesn't it? Any other ideas? Sounds like my company, right? Okay. I'll shout out if there's anything more, but let me go on and let's analyze this. I mean, this is worth looking into. This is what we need to find out. So first, let's review like what we're trying to do here. What's actually going on? So we're trying to reach certain outcomes, right? That's what the CEO was saying. Here's where we need to get to. And to do that, of course, we need to make some plans. Now, the problem is the plans are not perfect because we can't know everything, right? We can't know everything about our competitors, and we don't even know all of our own capabilities, right? There's things that Susan was doing in her organization, for example, that the CEO did not fully appreciate. But let's assume for the moment that we have excellent plans. Based on these, we are many people throughout the organization will take certain actions, but their actions are not always as per plan because it's difficult to align everyone. Everyone has their own perspective and their own things going on. For example, each one of the managers in Susan's division had their own idea about how to interpret the CEO's directives. But let's assume for the moment that we can somehow get great alignment across our whole organization. In that case, we expect that our actions will result in the desired outcomes. But we have a challenge there too, because the effects of our actions may not be the ones we wanted because the environment is unpredictable. You've got competitors making moves, you've got technology changes, GPT comes out of nowhere, COVID happens. So even if Susan does everything the CEO asks, how do we know if we're really making progress? So it's clear we're going to have to address each one of these gaps: knowledge, alignment, and effects. Enter the 4 disciplines of execution. So in 2021, Sean Covey and 4 other authors published the 4 disciplines of execution. Now, this is the same Sean Covey, by the way, who published the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People way back in 1990, which I didn't even realize until getting halfway through the book. So in 4DX, he explains that in addition to these 3 gaps, there's an even bigger problem. But then he presents a way to start solving all 4 of these problems. So apart from the 3 critical gaps, Sean Covey points out the elephant in the room, which is the whirlwind. So what is the whirlwind? Well, any kind of strategic plan requires action, right? Can't keep doing the same thing and get a different result. So we want to do something new, and that means we're going to have to change our behavior in some way. But there's a problem. We are all already 100% busy just keeping the lights on. We're doing 1,000,001 things, all the stuff that we already have in process. We can't stop doing that. So what does that mean? We don't have time. So now we can finally go back to our original example and understand better why Susan may have asked her question. She was already working on a whole bunch of strategic initiatives. So what more could she do? How could she go any faster? So let's explore the 4DX approach for solving this problem. Discipline 1. So there's 4. Discipline 1 is about focus. How do we focus our efforts? Well, Sean Covey recommends that we identify a wildly important goal, a WIG. So how does that work? Well, let me show you some examples. Back in 2002, I was working in IT, and Bill Gates and Microsoft focused all of the whole company around a singular goal of improving security. If you remember, but there was just a huge number of problems with security in Microsoft operating system and applications. So he focused the whole company around that. Said, this is what we need to do, number 1. In even better, 1961, JFK. He focused the whole nation on a single goal. We had to get to the moon before 1970. So now compare this approach to the multiple initiatives that the CEO laid out in our first example. It was just too much. No one could focus. So that's discipline 1. The second discipline is about leverage. So when we define our WIG, we'll include how to measure if we achieved it, but that's a lag measure. The problem with lag measures is they look backward. So we need to measure our efforts immediately. And for that, we need a lead measure. Now, a lead measure for your WIG should be both predictive and influenceable. We have to be able to it's something that should be under control, and it should directly lead, at least our assumption is, which will confirm that it will affect the WIG. So a good lead measure is something that could cause you to pivot, to actually change what you're doing. So here's some examples. So the first is from retail. Our team believes that we lose sales when a customer needs something that's out of stock. They're not going to wait around, right? They'll just go somewhere else. So we can measure how often that happens, and we want to see it going down. And that's something we can work on immediately. That's a lead metric. So how would, some other examples here. So how would this help Susan? Well, she would be able to measure if the efforts of our teams are having an effect. And if not, she would know that it might be time to try something different. All right. Third discipline, it's about engagement. So think about an exciting game of football, baseball. Everyone is looking over at the scoreboard. Oh boy, we're winning. So what makes for a compelling scoreboard? Well, it should be simple, not one of those busy Tableau dashboards. They have their place, but that's not what we're talking about here. And it needs to be seen by everyone. And it should show both the lead measure, which is updated daily, and the lag measure, which might be weekly, monthly, or even quarterly, right? Financials, that kind of stuff. It should be dead obvious whether things are going well. So here's an example from the retail company we talked about just now. So we can see our progress here in the red in reducing out of stocks. And we can see that our sales are going up. Now, of course, correlation does not guarantee causation, but it's a great sign. So how would this help Susan? Well, it helps both with her team and with the CEO. The team feels great about their progress, and the CEO can see that some stuff is actually happening. All right, so let's get to discipline 4. The fourth discipline is about accountability. So here is Susan holding her team accountable. So every week, each person makes a commitment to the team that they will move the ball forward, even if just in a small way, right? They may not have much time. They're keeping the lights on. They're doing 101 things, but they make a commitment that they're going to do something to move this forward. And we meet once a week in front of the scoreboard, and we talk about what we've done and what we're going to do next. So in this environment, nobody wants to feel that they let their team down. So, and if somebody's having a hard time, maybe somebody else can give them a hand. So this helps Susan make sure that all the progress and all the efforts continue. We don't have a great start and then kind of peter out. This is what keeps everything going when the going gets tough. So this concludes our whirlwind tour of 4DX. Now, this pattern is meant to be replicated throughout the organization. The idea is to take this overall WIG, get us to the moon, or Mars, if you're Elon Musk, and decompose that WIG into smaller WIGs for divisions and so on, which then roll up. So that's 4DX. Now, this all sounds really good. There's still a lot of questions as to how to really scale this up. What are some of the challenges? Well, Susan's organization is matrixed. There are a lot of people who are splitting their time working on multiple teams. So which meeting do they go to? And some people report to the same person, but work on totally different things. So it's going to take a lot of effort for Susan to replicate this, as good an idea as it is, across her entire division. So it would be great if there was something that could help her simplify and organize this approach. So actually there is. And it is called Flight Levels, and it grew out of the Kanban ecosystem. But before I move on to Kanban Flight Levels, I wanted to take a minute and see if there are any questions in the chat. Of course, we'll have time at the end.
So far, there are none.
Okay, no problem. All right, so let's see how Kanban Flight Levels can help us. So the Flight Levels model took off after Klaus Leopold published his book, Rethinking Agile, which I highly recommend, both of these books, in 2019. So simply put, Flight Levels is a thinking model that can help us find out where in an organization we have to do what in order to achieve the results that we want to achieve. His observation was that, especially in agile transformations, many of these sort of large-scale agile transformations just focus on creating agile teams and not enough on connecting those teams together, coordinating and connecting them to strategy. So you need to look at higher levels in order to really achieve organizational agility. So let's dive into that and see what that looks like. So the idea is to achieve true business agility, we need to manage the flow of work from 3 viewpoints. They're viewpoints. There's the strategic level, the coordination level, and the operational level. Now, this is not about the org chart. I know it kind of looks like an org chart. It's not about the org chart. The same people who work on the teams at the operational level, those could be IT teams, HR, finance, all of the teams around the whole organization, they send delegates to coordination level, which could be, it's sort of like a turbocharged scrum of scrums, some of you may have heard of. They also send delegates to the strategic level. So remember what the whirlwind is. That is what we're calling the work that's not directly related to the WIG. Could be strategic, but it's not our primary strategy. Of course, we still need to track that. Now, this work is very nicely tracked at the operational level, or flight level 1. All the teams in Susan's division will use boards, could be Kanban boards, even a Scrum board, to track all the things they're working on. But what about the WIG? Well, the strategic level board tracks this beautifully. And this is where we capture our WIG objective, we decompose it into smaller WIGs, show lead and lag metrics, and connect that to the operational work. So every week, Susan meets with some of her team members in front of the strategy board to see how our actions have moved the ball forward. The CEO can take a look. It's right there. So, all right, so what goes on a flight level 3 or strategy board? Well, if we're using 4DX, we would start with our wildly important goal. After that, so here it is for a drone supplier, our wildly important goal, become the leading drone supplier in USA for delivery of essential goods to remote areas, right? And what we do is we then define a set of specific and measurable business outcomes at 3 different time horizons. You've got your long-term, your medium-term, and your short-term. So we're taking those outcomes, those concrete, specific outcomes. It takes a while to come up with a good outcome. This is not a trivial task. I don't want to trivialize that. But you come up with the outcomes and you subdivide them until you get to short term. If some of you are saying, this looks a little bit like OKRs, you'd be right. So for Susan, the specific time frames that make sense are 5 years, 1 year, and next quarter. That's because, for pharmaceutical companies, there's a long time horizon for developing drugs, right? But for high-tech companies, these 3 horizons would probably be much shorter. Could be like 1 year, or 2 years or 1 year, 6 months, and, a month or 3 months. So in this case, the drone supplier has identified these specific outcomes. And of course, this is a board, right? This will go on a board. So every one of these will be analyzed. Maybe it's not quite right. We have to fix it. So none of this is set in stone. This is what we think we need to do to get to our WIG. And we're constantly inspecting and adapting. That's why we meet once a week. So, so this exercise helps Susan align her whole organization, since they all know what targets they're shooting for in the long term, in the medium term, and in the short term. Now, they also identified a specific initiative that's going to get them there. Like, to get to this, they don't have to think about, right? It could be very difficult. Like, what do I have to do to become the leading drone supplier? Like, that's too hard to think about. But I can think about what I might need to do for this short-term thing. Getting a drone cluster that can carry a payload that's bigger than what a single drone can carry. Okay, yeah, probably would need, we could brainstorm around that. We probably need a cluster coordination platform. Probably that's a software, there's probably some hardware, it's probably a whole bunch of things that would be needed to get that done across multiple teams, multiple parts of the organization. So this does not mean, of course, that this one initiative, which we call a flight item for reasons that I'll get into later, but that doesn't mean that's the only thing they're working on. Far from it. We've got the whirlwind, right? But this is the thing they're working on that directly will lead them to make progress on the WIG. And they're making a commitment to make this regular progress on it. All right, so bear with me. 2 more slides and we'll see if there's any questions. So, yes, we break down the WIG, identify actions. And the reason we call them actions is at this level, this corporate strategy level, this flight item, this thing we want to do, could be 2 or 3 things, right? I'm just showing one here, but probably it would be more than one. But these initiatives, they could be an action like acquire a smaller competitor, take a controlling interest in an insurtech that does a machine learning, right? So they're not, I don't want to imply that these are IT initiatives or technology initiatives. They're actions that we take, which could be a software initiative, but they are things, concrete things that we're going to do that we believe that we are proposing will get us to these short-term outcomes. So we review and adjust this at least weekly. So contrast this against sort of a typical approach to corporate strategy. What happens? Well, let's see. Once a year, people get together and create a whole bunch of slides. You know, the CEO presents it. I mean, what we saw in the first example, right? That's a strategy by PowerPoint. And this is very far from that. This is a living, breathing strategy. And about that strategy by PowerPoint, I am guilty as charged. So definitely, this is something we can do better. So in order to achieve our WIG, we're going to have to make changes, not only in drug development, but also in the sales and marketing side, right? So what we could do, again, this is the strategy board. This is a slightly stylized version, but basically this is what a board would look like. And here what we're doing is we're using blue to indicate the drug development outcomes and green to indicate the sales and marketing outcomes. So you can see that the sales and marketing team, oops, I have a typo there, but you can see that the sales and marketing team is indicating that to become the leading supplier of anti-cancer drugs, they are going to need to get doctors to prescribe our drugs over the competitor 20% more often than they do today. And to do that, they have to have an awareness. They have to know about our product. They don't even know about it. How can they prescribe it? So there's different outcomes that they're going to shoot for in parallel with all the other stuff that we're doing. You can see this lymphoma drug. We got to bring it to market to match with the other drugs we already have. So Sarah thinks this is great because she can use this to help align her division's efforts, right? She'll be working on the drug discovery stuff and development with those of Paulo, who oversees sales and marketing, right? So we're aware of what each other is doing. We're all working towards this WIG. That's called alignment. So on the right side are the tangible actions and initiatives that we're undertaking to achieve these outcomes. So one of the things that Sarah's people suggested is they wanted to track the number of days that an expensive titration machine is down. And apologies, these are not super real examples, as I'm not not in the pharmaceuticals business. But let's say they have these expensive machines and they go down all the time. And they speculate that based on how they feel, that these machines being down all the time has a real snowball effect on their schedule. And if they could just keep these machines and repair them more quickly, maybe have more spare parts on hand, relatively simple stuff, that it would have a tangible effect on shrinking their time to market. If you're sitting waiting around for a machine that's broken, that's there's a snowball effect. So the sales folks, on the other hand, are tracking the presentations they make. So these are the lead metrics that they're tracking, the stuff that they can directly affect right now, that they feel will have an effect on the lag metric, which of course is the revenue from anti-cancer, right? Now that's something that's updated once a quarter, and it's not something we can directly, immediately affect. It's a downstream effect from all these other things that we're doing. So this is how we tie that together. So the actual people, the people who gather in front of this board, include a few actual scientists, right? The people actually working on this, on these efforts. You may rotate those people. Some salespeople, some folks from marketing, Sarah herself, and her direct reports. So it's 10, 12, 15, 20 people, reasonable number of people, and you're meeting weekly on this. So this board, in addition to that meeting, this board is projected in the team room. So everybody is highly aware of our strategy and exactly what we're doing to achieve it, even if you're not part of the weekly stand-up. So now, okay, that's all fine. That's a strategy. Great, we got that. But how does this link directly to what the operational teams use in their daily work? So at the top here, we've got the strategy board. Pretend that's the same board that I just showed you. And at the bottom, we've got a board that Susan's pharmaceutical scientists, that team, is using to track their daily work. You can see that they're splitting their time between a project to deliver drugs via nanoparticles. That's a thing I just found out about. Pretty amazing. And regular daily tasks like cleaning equipment, repairs, preparing slides, and all the other things that they're calling business as usual. So let's take a look at the initiative that we identified at the strategic level that we believe is going to directly help us make progress on the WIG. And that was called beta mutation testing, let's say. That's a initiative, big initiative. And that how we connect strategy to execution, to the operational team, is by literally copying that ticket to the operational board. So you can see that becomes another initiative that we're working on. Now, of course, notice that this strategic work, right? We're now subdividing it. We're creating, tasks or whatever the team calls it, stories, user stories, whatever they have, they're tracking their work. You can see, though, that the strategic work is dwarfed by all the other stuff that's going on. Are they going to stop the other stuff? Probably they can't. They have other commitments they've already made. But the point is that because a few members of this team here attend the weekly strategy stand-up, they can negotiate how much of the team's capacity is reserved for the beta mutation initiative relative to the other work. And no matter what, it can never be zero, right? Because the CEO has stated, this is what we all have to do. This is the direction we're going. So to help with that, Susan asks her team leads to track their capacity allocation over time so she can inform the CEO how much, relatively speaking, of their effort is being devoted to this turnaround strategy. And of course, she's planning on asking for more resources. So it will be useful to show him how much time is being spent elsewhere. Of course, now they may talk and they may come up with another option. Maybe they slow down or even stop some of the other initiatives. But that's exactly the kind of discussion they should be having, right? This is what they need to talk about. There's no magic bullet here. We're just making this visible and making it easy to talk about and discuss, easier. So So why would we do that? Well, that's the whole point. That's why we have this WIG. It's wildly important. If it was just a little bit important, maybe we wouldn't do that, but it's wildly important. So that is how we connect. Now, of course, just a couple notes, and then we'll get to takeaways and questions. A couple notes. There are many other aspects. I've just barely scratched the surface that we didn't have time to go over. But so one is lean portfolio management. With flight levels, we can effectively manage large portfolios. And hopefully with what I've shown you, you can sort of extrapolate in your mind. You can see where we would use these visual boards to track these portfolios. They would be connected to the work on all the teams that are working on those portfolio initiatives. And one of the things that and that's basically at flight level 2. So we showed you an example of flight level 3 strategy. We showed an example of flight level 1 operations. What I didn't show today was a coordination level, which you only need if you have a large number of teams working together on the same things. So if you have this big project, 4 or 5 teams all working on this work, they may have dependencies, they need to coordinate. That's where flight level 2 comes into play. So another one is lean budgeting. So in flight levels, we assign budget to outcomes, not outputs. So this outcome of basically what we would negotiate with the CEO is, okay, based on this long-term outcome, medium term, and short term, how much budget are we going to allocate to achieving this short-term outcome? And of course, we come up with a couple of actions we're going to take. Now, those actions may not achieve that outcome, or they may. But so it's not about a specific project. It's about achieving a specific goal. That's what we budget. And that's really helpful, right? Because otherwise you have these projects from hell that keep going on. They blow through their budget, and we think, sunk cost fallacy. We got to keep going. But if we really assign budget at the outcome level, then we can say, look, I want to achieve this, but if it costs more than $10 million, frankly, the cost benefit isn't worth it anymore. So I may need to chop that, may need to refactor it a little bit. So those are the really important questions, discussions that need to be going on. And that's what we didn't see in our work at the Social Security Administration. Once they came up with that strategy, the 5-year plan, there was no changes to it, even though the assumptions that they had made about how much work would actually be involved turned out to be wildly off. There was no feedback loop there. That's what we're trying to provide. So we just barely touched on it, agile interactions between teams. I mean, that's kind of the main point of flight levels. All these boards are great, but if people aren't talking, it's the people that make the change, not the board. So really, a core practice of flight levels is to figure out who needs to meet with whom, how often, that kind of stuff, and helping to optimize our meetings, right? We never have a problem of too few meetings. It's always too many meetings, right? So the other thing is value is generated at every level. So in the example that I showed, it looked like always the strategy was coming from the strategy board, and then it was being subdivided and we brought down to the team level, and they would work on it. But that's just one possible way. New insights, initiatives, and even strategies can come from the team level or the coordination level, which would be like a program that multiple teams are working on. At any point, we could come up with something. We then bring it up to this in our weekly strategy review, and we say, "Oh my God, this is a whole new wrinkle to our strategy. We need to adjust this. This is a huge opportunity," and we can adjust our strategy board right then based on this incredible important input that we got from things that are going on, on the ground. That kind of stuff happens all the time, right? Discoveries happen by accident. At HBO, we were working And several people were given a couple weeks to do some personal experiments, and several of those actually became HBO products. Right? That's what happens. That's innovation. We want that. So one of the things we do in flight levels is we do a little bit of work mapping out and sort of figuring out where these interactions take place, and we call that a flight route, because sort of you can mentally visualize, the work starting at the team level, and then we coordinate up to level 2, and then we have to see what's the implication at the strategic level. So that's a route, of a flight item. So I know we're stretching that aviation analogy quite a bit, but it works. So another one is measure and improve. We barely scratch the surface, but Flight Levels has a very quantitative approach. Flow-based metrics, like Kanban type metrics, also business metrics. You saw the lead and lag metrics. I mean, very, very metrics. Leveraging metrics to the fullest for continuous improvement. So that is. Any specific questions about flight levels that I want to talk about? Then I'll talk about how to sort of get started.
So far, there are no questions.
Okay, perfect. So how do we, this is great. So imagine we want to get started with 40X and with flight levels. We're going to put that together and really see if we can use those to activate business agility in our organization. So what would we do? Well, first of all, we don't have to change the org chart. That's not, we're not going to be reorganized into squads and tribes and all that kind of stuff. We're not saying you can never do that. We're just saying that should never be the first thing that you do. It's very disruptive. It can be very, it can threaten people's psychological safety. People enjoy who they're working with. So it's not, we never recommend to start with that. Instead, we're managing the work, not the workers. So these boards, we're tracking what's going on. Whoever's working on them, whoever they actually report to, that's a different discussion. That's a different topic. But these, obviously you want cross-functional teams, and absolutely they may have multiple people from multiple different parts of the reporting hierarchy. And that's completely fine. That's expected. There's nothing wrong with that. So it's for managing the work, not the workers. And where do you start? Well, where it makes sense. We don't do a big bang approach. We don't say, here's the wig, and we're going to have all of the teams start to use these boards. No, we would not do that. We would start small, but big enough to matter. That's the idea. So we don't start in something trivial that doesn't matter, but you don't start in your mission critical area either. You want to start where it makes sense. And maybe there's a team that's feeling, not happy with the way they're doing things. They're looking for an improvement. That could be a great place to start. And ideally, it would spread organically, right? Especially, nothing. They say success has many fathers, but failure is an orphan, right? So as we start to have success with this, and people see how useful these visualizations are. Maybe they can be a little scary at first. People are like, well, wait a minute. Do I really want to have all of these details visible to everyone? So how we do it matters a lot, right? We don't want to, last thing we want to do is contribute to people not feeling psychological safety. So we don't want to do that. So, we want to be, we do it, and our success will naturally encourage with social proof, provide the social proof so that we can spread throughout the organization. Of course, we recommend leveraging training and coaching. We need internal change agents. We can supplement that with some consultants, but consultants cannot run the show. That's not, you don't want to hire, an army of agile coaches and scrum masters to teach everybody Scrum or Kanban or anything. That's not what we recommend. And the good news is these benefits compound over time. So we don't need perfection. In fact, all the things that I just showed you, you don't even need all of those. We could start with a really small piece, very small, just sort of listing things out in a very rough way. And gradually we can add details and more things as we find them useful. So it's true to its Kanban roots. We start with what we're doing now, and we incrementally improve. And every small change that we do, what experience has shown, even a little bit of these Kanban flight levels practices really give us benefits. So the good thing is you don't have to do every practice to get any benefits. Far from it. Key takeaways. Then we'll have some time for Q&A. So organizations struggle to execute on their strategies, and you can see that we saw that there's three main gaps: knowledge gap, alignment, and effects. But the biggest culprit is the whirlwind. It's just we're all busy. Nobody's sitting idly around like, oh, I can drop everything and work on this strategy. It just doesn't happen in the real world. So the 4 disciplines of execution help us break this logjam. Those are the 4 disciplines. Kanban flight levels enable us to visualize, collaborate, and improve. And in fact, in my opinion, they're just a perfect complement to the 4 disciplines of execution. Like I said, I think it's a highly effective combination. Start where you are now, bring your changes in incrementally, and your benefits will compound over time. And with that, I think we can take questions. Just put some links in here and some QR codes for if you wanted to actually learn more about the courses that we're teaching to actually do this stuff. Here are some links to learn more. And with that, let's see if there's any questions.
That was really good, Craeg. So far, there are no questions. Okay, there's one question here. Can you give an example of assigning budgets to outcomes, not to outputs? In other words, can you have an output without an outcome?
Yes. It is, first of all, these words are used, everywhere. And many people sort of define them differently. And that's, I would never presume to say that, flight levels has the only true definition and everyone else's definition is wrong. Not at all. But what we have done is in flight levels, we sort of came up with working definitions just so we could, sort of all agree that when we're talking about flight levels, here's what we mean. So basically the outputs, they're more like artifacts, things that you can achieve. It's sort of a binary thing, like did we ship by August 31st or not? That kind of stuff. So that would be an output, but the outcome will be more a business outcome. It's more like, for example, even on a project level, can a project or program that we're, something we're building, can it reduce what I like to call chair swivels? So in one government agency, I went to, this is actually New York City. I went to one of the intake centers for benefits. And I actually observed someone applying for benefits. And the person who was processing the application was constantly swiveling in her chair. What I mean was she was working in one application, then had to switch to another application, then switch to another application. So one of the key outcomes that we wanted from that, to achieve from that initiative, would be to reduce the number of chair swivels, so that basically, as you're going through these key use cases, if you will, you'd be in one application. So it's more efficient and things like that. So we would assign a budget to those outcomes. And what that does is it frees us from being stuck on our first idea of what we thought would do that. We thought, oh, here's a project that will get that done. But maybe as we get smarter, we realize, well, wait a minute, actually we can buy something. We just noticed there's something on the market that does 80% of what we need already. So we should actually switch over to that. So that, it sort of facilitates that kind of discussion. It's not a magic bullet, but it facilitates that discussion if we're always focused on the outcome, right? Otherwise, we're always looking at projects and programs, and those are budgeted, and we're like, oh, we can't change it. We've got this budget here. No, the budget is on what you're trying to achieve. And if there's a better way to achieve it, we're going to be looking for that. So that's the idea, is it helps us have the right kinds of discussions, sometimes painful discussions. It's not a silver bullet, but it just leads us more in that direction of being more creative about it and not so stuck. Did that help?
Oh, definitely, yes. There's one other question on this idea of WIG from a formulation perspective. Who puts those things together? Who should be the stakeholders that formulates this?
Fantastic question. Absolutely the right question. So Flight Levels does not get into strategy formulation. That is outside the scope of Flight Levels. 4DX does talk about it. They give some recommendations. That's why it's a great combination. But for Flight Levels, the Kanban flight level approach is, hey, you've got your strategy. We'll help you visualize it, manage it, and improve it. But we're not about how you come up with it. But in the 4DX, they basically talk about collaborative groups of stakeholders, the usual, right? What we want to get away from is being completely reliant on expensive external consultants who will give us a 50-page strategy deck. Now, we still may use those. I'm not saying they don't have value. Not at all. McKinsey, folks like that. There's a reason people hire them again and again, and that because they have an incredible wealth of knowledge on what's going on in the industry and the competition, and we need to know that. So I'm not saying there's not value in that, but you wouldn't want to rely on somebody outside the organization to tell you what to do. They should be part of the information gathering, and then you want this collaborative group. But it would likely be primarily senior leadership. I mean, that's kind of their job, is to steer the company, have the vision for where the organization is going. But who exactly is involved in those sessions, it would be up to the organization. But generally it's the senior leadership. That's the difference. The senior leadership comes up with it, but when you manage it and when you're interacting, that's where you involve the teams, and that's the magic. Because we need to know it in case after case. The problem is that the people, I think they did a study. I think McKinsey did this study, and they found that there were 5 key strategic things that the CEO had mentioned, or the commissioner of the agency had mentioned, and 70% of people in the organization couldn't name even 2 of them. So clearly there's a lack of a communication. I mean, how can that be? The key strategy, the most important things we need to work on, and we don't even know it? How can that be? So that's the problem that Flight Levels is trying to solve, those knowledge gaps and alignment gaps. Hopefully that helps.
Awesome. Any other questions? There are no questions, Greg. Any other question? I want to thank you for an incredible presentation, very insightful. We're also grateful. Thank you, sir.
All right. Thank you. Pleasure to be here. Thank you. Thanks for inviting me. All right.